The humidity in Miami was thick enough to choke the breath out of the stadium, but the silence inside Hard Rock Stadium was heavier. Lionel Messi stood with his hands on his hips, his eyes fixed on a patch of grass near the center circle, as if searching for a script that had suddenly been torn to shreds. 17 minutes remained on the clock. 17 minutes before the greatest player to ever touch a football, the reigning world champion and the face of a billion-dollar marketing machine, was sent home in the most humiliating collapse in the history of the sport. Somewhere in a climate-controlled FIFA boardroom, a high-ranking executive likely stopped breathing. The golden goose was on the chopping block, and the executioner was a nation most of the fans in the stands couldn't find on a map. This was never supposed to be a contest. It was supposed to be a coronation. Argentina arrived in Florida as the undisputed kings of the world, the #1 ranked team on the planet, led by a man who had already completed football. Their opponents were Cape Verde, a tiny archipelago of 10 volcanic islands drifting off the coast of West Africa. A nation of just over 500,000 people, a population smaller than a mid-sized American city, playing in the very first World Cup they had ever qualified for. On paper, it was the most lopsided knockout tie in the history of the competition. It was a mismatch of such staggering proportions that the betting markets had essentially stopped taking wagers on an Argentine victory. It was a formality. It was a photo op. It was supposed to be a gentle evening's work before the real tournament started. Instead, it became a night of pure, unadulterated terror for the establishment. The game started with the mechanical precision of a giant. In the 29th minute, the script seemed to be holding firm. Messi collected a pass on the edge of the box, the kind of ball he has received 10,000 times before. He killed it dead with the outside of that legendary left boot, a touch so soft it looked like he was catching a falling leaf. Before the Cape Verdean defense could even register the danger, he flicked it past the goalkeeper. 1-0. It was the 20th World Cup goal of his career, a record that stands as a monument to his longevity. The stadium erupted in a sea of blue and white. Business as usual. The Giants were doing giant things, and the Minnows were expected to roll over, collect their commemorative jerseys, and head to the airport with a nice story for their grandchildren. But Cape Verde never read the script. They didn't come to Miami to be extras in a documentary about Messi's final dance. As the match crossed the hour mark, the atmosphere began to shift from celebratory to anxious. The Argentine midfield, usually so composed, started to fray. Then it happened. In the 60th minute, Dini Borges found space on the flank and delivered a ball that found Gary Rodriguez, who fed a surging Jamiro Montero. The ball eventually fell to Dore Duarte. He didn't hesitate. He squeezed a shot into the far corner that left the Argentine defense rooted to the spot. Hard Rock Stadium fell into a stunned silence. It was the kind of quiet you only experience when something is happening that is not supposed to be allowed. Level at 1-1. This was the moment the nerves arrived. Not for the underdogs, who were suddenly playing with the freedom of men who had already won, but for the champions. The minutes ticked away like a countdown to a disaster. 90 minutes came and went with the score still deadlocked. Extra time. This was the point where FIFA's nightmare stopped being a hypothetical scenario discussed in crisis meetings and started reading like a headline being typed in real time. The tournament's entire commercial architecture is built on the gravity of its stars. They need Messi in the quarterfinals. They need him in the semifinals. They need his face on the posters, his name on the jerseys, and his presence on every American broadcast selling this World Cup to a country still grappling with the nuances of the offside rule. Messi is the reason a casual fan in Kansas sets a late alarm. He is the reason sponsors pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a slice of the pie. And for 20 minutes of extra time, a nation of 10 islands had both hands wrapped firmly around that goose's neck. Argentina thought they had finally escaped the trap in the 93rd minute. After a frantic scramble from a Messi corner, Lautaro Martinez rifled a shot high past the keeper, 2-1. The relief was palpable. The champions exhaled. The blue and white machine relaxed, believing the fairy tale had finally run out of pages. Order had been restored. The natural hierarchy of the footballing world had been re-established. But then the 103rd minute happened, and it changed everything. Cuca Cabral picked the ball up on the left wing, cut inside past a stumbling defender, and unleashed a right-footed shot that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It curled into the far corner with such perfection it may stand forever as the greatest goal in the history of African football. 2-2. Level again. I need you to really sit with what that meant in that moment. This wasn't just a goal, it was a declaration. A nation of 500,000 people, in their first ever World Cup, had drawn level with the world champions for the second time in a single night, in extra time, with a penalty shootout looming like a dark cloud on the horizon. A penalty shootout is a coin flip, a moment of pure chaos where reputation and ranking mean nothing. The most storied team in the sport, with the greatest player of all time, was 17 minutes from being eliminated by a country younger than most of the people watching the game. The biggest upset in World Cup history was sitting right there, fully loaded, with a finger on the trigger. Football, being the cruel and unpredictable beast that it is, wouldn't let them pull it. The 111th minute arrived, and with it, a moment of heartbreak that will haunt the islands of Cape Verde for generations. Messi swung a desperate set piece into the crowded box. Christian Romero rose to meet it, but his header took a wicked deflection off the Cape Verdean defender, Dini Borges. The ball trickled past the goalkeeper and into the net. An own goal, 3-2. After everything they had endured, after 2 incredible comebacks, after 111 minutes of throwing their bodies in front of the best team on the planet, the goal that finally broke the resistance of Cape Verde was scored by Cape Verde. There is no crueler way for a dream like that to die. Even then, they didn't quit. Even with their legs visibly gone and their hearts shattered by the own goal, the Blue Sharks kept hurling bodies forward. They forced corner after corner. Argentina's own goalkeeper, Emiliano Martinez, had to perform a series of desperate acts, including flinging himself at the feet of a Cape Verdean striker in the dying seconds to preserve the lead. In the final breath of the match, a loose ball dropped in the 6-yard box with the net gaping wide, and for a split second it looked like the impossible was back on. Then the offside flag went up by a breath. When the final whistle eventually screamed across the Miami night, the Argentine players didn't celebrate. They sank to the turf, ravaged by cramp and exhaustion, physically and mentally wrecked by a team they were supposed to brush aside before dinner. It would be easy to file this under the category of plucky losers and move on to the next match day. That would be an insult to what actually occurred on that pitch. Cape Verde did not get lucky. They were not the beneficiaries of a fluke. While the expected goals numbers were heavily tilted in Argentina's favor, somewhere around 2.16 to 0.45, those numbers don't capture the psychological warfare of the match. They dragged the world champions to the absolute edge because they possessed a tactical discipline and a collective spirit that neutralized the individual brilliance of their opponents. At the center of it all stood Vozinha, a 40-year-old goalkeeper who entered the tournament as a free agent. He made 8 saves, including a stop on a Messi free kick that defied the limits of human reaction time. This is the same team that walked out of a group containing Spain, Uruguay, and Saudi Arabia without suffering a single defeat. This was a footballing nation the rest of the world simply hadn't bothered to notice yet. The fair thing to say is that Argentina were, in the end, worthy winners. They dominated the possession. They created the more dangerous chances. Messi was, as always, the gravitational center of the game, and champions find a way to win even on their ugliest nights. They got the job done. They survived. But the honest thing to say right next to it is that they were about 20 minutes and one curling shot away from a result that would have fundamentally altered the landscape of the sport. This was the exact moment the corporate machinery of global football realized it had forgotten to account for the one thing money can never truly own: the pride of a nation with nothing left to lose. For FIFA, Cape Verde going home is a footnote, a small story about a small country that did well. But Messi going home in the round of 32, beaten by a team from 10 islands half their sponsors had never heard of, would have been a marketing apocalypse. We have to remember where this World Cup is being played. It is largely on American soil, in the very market FIFA has spent decades trying to conquer. With Messi playing his club football just an hour up the road at Inter Miami, he isn't just a player at this tournament. He is the entire pitch to a casual American audience. He is the name on the shirt they'll actually buy. The ticket demand, the television numbers, the entire sales machine of this tournament is leaning on one 38-year-old man staying alive in the bracket. And for 20 minutes in Miami, that machine was trembling. If Argentina had fallen, the ripple effect would have been catastrophic for the tournament's bottom line. The air would have gone out of the balloon. The narrative of the American World Cup is inextricably tied to the Messi World Cup. Without him, the casual viewer in a non-traditional footballing city might decide to tune out. The broadcast rights, negotiated on the back of superstar power, would have lost their primary hook. The golden goose isn't just a metaphor. It's a financial reality that dictates how these tournaments are organized, scheduled, and promoted. Cape Verde almost burned the whole house down, not because they were better players, but because they refused to be intimidated by the cost of the jerseys they were facing. In the end, the system held. Argentina survived. They head to Atlanta to face Egypt on Tuesday, and the tournament's golden goose lives to sell another round of tickets, another jersey, and another television ad slot. The machine continues to grind forward, but the image of those Argentine giants collapsed on the grass, unable to celebrate because they were too busy trying to breathe, tells the real story of the night. They weren't just playing against 11 men. They were playing against the sheer terror of an ending they weren't prepared for. Cape Verde's coach, Bubista, needed only a few words in the post-match press conference. "We showed our identity," he said. They did more than that. They showed the cracks in the armor of the elite. They showed that in the modern game, where money and data are supposed to eliminate risk, the human element still remains the ultimate wildcard. 500,000 people back home on those 10 islands, along with millions of neutrals who didn't know a single name on that team 3 weeks ago, are never going to forget what happened in Miami. They are never going to forget the night the world champions were forced to beg for the whistle to blow. The tournament will continue, and the records will show a 3-2 victory for Argentina. The history books will record another step toward what many believe is Messi's final glory. But those who watch the game will remember the 103rd minute. They will remember the silence of the suites and the panic in the eyes of the favorites. They will remember that for a brief, beautiful, and terrifying window of time, the biggest underdog in the history of the World Cup had the kings of the world on their knees. Where does this performance land for you in the pantheon of great upsets? Is this the best underdog run we've seen? Or has the corporate weight of the game already made you forget about the Blue Sharks? The goose survived, but only just.